Welcome to Disambiguation. I'm your host, Michael Fawcett. Each week we interview experts in AI, generative AI, and business automation to help business leaders understand how to use these tools for the biggest business impact. In our show today, we look at tactical AI, content workflows, and project automations. I'm joined by Michael Greenberg, founder and CEO of Third Brain Automation. Michael, welcome.
Michael, thank you for having me.
That's not going to get confusing at all, is it? Michael? No, Michael. Good.
Well, rock, paper, scissors forward right now.
Yeah, exactly. So can you share a little bit about your journey, what led you to found Third Brain Automation, and then, kind of what's the vision did you have for the company when you started, and I guess have evolved some since then, but yeah, kind of give us a little background.
Absolutely. So I started my career sort of straddling the line between technology and operations because my brother ended up going to MIT and getting the CS degree, going on to work in big tech and finance. He went and became a real systems architect. I knew that I was never going to love coding like he did, and that I was good enough at it that I should be doing something with it. And so I dropped out of school, went to a coding boot camp, joined a pre-seed startup, and worked in and around that sort of startup land ecosystem in the pre-series A range mostly for the next few years, building prototypes and working on go-to-market strategies as sort of a combination COO, CTO, but never really fitting in anywhere. Long story short, I ended up building a marketing agency using a gap I saw in the market as a result of AI, because AI took the cost of transcription from $1 a minute to 10 cents a minute.
Yeah.
That allowed us to do podcasts as content marketing, interview subject matter experts, much lower cost structure to create high value content. Did that for several years, built that business up, sold a large chunk of it, and then went to work for a guy here in the local area who was just moved back from San Francisco, built up a massive, like $100 million plus Facebook ads agency, and was starting a venture studio here in St. Louis. So I helped him with his personal brand because of my podcast background. And then I also helped him set up internal operations, do some go-to-market, build out some marketing operations. And the last project I did for them, which inspired me to start Third Brain, was building out the ClickUp infrastructure to run their fastest growing company. So some of my friends over at ClickUp said, "Hey, Michael, you should come be a ClickUp consultant." I said, "You know what? That sounds like a great idea." Did it. That was just about 2 years ago now. And we started by calling ourselves ClickDown. But our clients kept referring us to non-ClickUp users. We kept expanding, and it really took shape that there is this thing called digital operations that what I thought was going to become the biggest thing and was going to become where I could really place my zone of genius, because my whole career I've been doing remote global teams. I've been doing this automation technology operations thing, and I never had anything to call it.
There you go. An outlet for all of that, right?
Exactly.
Well, so I'm really curious about how businesses that you're working with can use, leverage AI to optimize content workflows, and really, what are some of the most effective tools, strategies that you've implemented with your clients?
Absolutely. So as I called out before, I spent quite a bit of time in marketing and podcasts. And so we've developed a bit of a specialty inside of content workflows. And I'm going to break those down into two major categories. One is what we'll call internal workflows. So this might be the onboarding call to the client brief, documentation creation, or taking the 5 sales calls you guys did and taking the call with the sales engineer and using that to create scoping documentation. These sort of things are generally high value. Most of them are centered around client management, account management processes. Some of our customers have like internal meetings, executive meetings, that sort of thing they want.
Yep.
But then we can use AI to create consistent, customized notes out of every solution.
Mm,
And that can be a document to hand off, or that could just be the meeting notes. So that's sort of tool one.
sure.
The second one is all the other social media, public facing content.
Mm,
Those are very different workflow types because one of them requires a volume output, and the other one is all about maintaining the maximum level of accuracy in some
mm,
sort of summarization
yeah,
generally.
yeah, makes sense.
We do both. We do a lot of both. um, we have an unofficial internal rule: always be recording,
Mm,
because we try to do it everywhere. Um, but really, it's super simple when it gets down to it, how you actually implement, how you leverage these tools.
mm,
What thing are we doing that we do all the time that we have either hired somebody to do because it's just like repeatable summarization task?
mm,
Onboarding docs are my favorite example of that.
mm, yeah.
Or what have we not been able to provide because it is too expensive? So for coaching or like mastermind community clients, we have a lot of professional communities
Mm,
taking their meeting notes from when their groups get together and turning them into actual usable notes that they can then put out in newsletters or put into a searchable database of some sort.
mm.
Very high value task that they cannot accomplish by putting like a librarian in or something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, having somebody sit and take notes, I guess that's not the practical way anymore.
And it doesn't scale if you're running 20 or 30 groups either.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Well, so it's two obvious different paths there. I think are interesting, and we can talk about both. But I think maybe first, can we just start by talking a little bit about some of the practical ways your clients are using these tools to automate projects, to automate processes, and
Yeah.
then maybe we can talk a little bit about some of the specific kind of tools or platforms that you think have helped generate the most value for your clients.
Yeah. So I'd say when it comes to these sort of workflows, the most popular areas that clients come to us with issues
Mm,
in are onboarding,
mm,
so handoff between departments, um, or, and I'm going to make this a little broader category, clarity.
mm,
And when I say clarity, it's normally some sort of reporting or time tracking or
mm,
project status issue,
mm.
where because somebody is so busy with other things or everyone is so busy with other things,
Yeah,
nothing gets updated.
yeah. That makes sense, and it must really be tied in, for a lot of the companies too, like projects and project reporting, and especially if you're doing like, contracting for public sector there are a lot of
Yeah.
regulations, reporting, things you have to do on a regular basis. So having some method to automate that process would certainly not only save you a lot of effort, but it also would save you a lot of trouble if it's a compliance issue, particularly if it's a public sector sort of client.
Yeah.
So,
And we have clients, not public sector, but equally important,
mm,
with clients who operate franchises
mm,
where, oh, they come in and they've got 10 systems that they can't change
yeah,
because those are the systems that every franchise in the country uses. And so when we're building into something like that, we're generally coming in, identifying how they work. So first off, we're sitting down, we're mapping out workflows. The first month we're working with a client is
mm,
generally no code.
yeah,
It's just let's draw things.
mhm,
And once we know that all the systems can talk to each other and
mm,
how they can talk to each other, once we have that like base infrastructure, we're at what we call level 3, which means we know where all the data goes, we know where it's
mm.
supposed to live, and we know how to connect everywhere to the point that we have gotten all the core pieces talking.
Yeah. So that's that whole process assessment is really the foundation that you're gonna build all the other pieces on. Yeah, that makes
Exactly.
sense.
You just can't build a house without a stable foundation. And
Yeah.
if your company did not pick every piece of software with this sort of automation in
Mhm.
mind, you don't have the right foundation.
Yeah. I mean, that is one of the biggest issues I see in general when I look at companies and talk to clients about this is the data picture underneath, right? The fact that we've had such a proliferation of solutions in most businesses because it's easy, because it's in the cloud. So I can, my credit card, I can just, swipe and get it a couple seats for this department or whatever. And that
Yeah.
must be a nightmare when you first start trying to dig through all of that and go like, okay, how do we make all these things talk to each other?
Yeah. We'll sit down, we'll get a list of 20 tools when we first enter a company.
Mm,
And then every time we meet with another department or person, the first time we meet with somebody, we know there's a tool that nobody has talked about before.
yep.
Every person in the company is going
Yeah.
to have one like that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's and honestly, these days too, just even the fact that a lot of folks are bringing in their own favorite chatbot and, using Gen AI in the background to do some of the tasks. I mean, all those are just other systems, other tools that are laying around that aren't kind of tied into your whole process framework.
Oh, yeah. And sometimes they've got some magic prompt that does half their work. But
Yeah.
in order to get that prompt to work, they are copy and pasting from 50 other places. And
Mhm.
when we see something like that, we say, oh, that's a potential automation.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. So I mean, this sounds like the foundation, then almost like a map you build out to help you figure out where you're going to have to customize for different businesses. And so how do you think about that? How do you think of customizations? Obviously size matters when it comes to that industry,
Yeah.
and then scalability obviously is also a big issue. So how do you make sure all of those things are accommodated and that it's scalable to meet the needs of the business?
So we actually do call it a map. We call it a systems map. And
Mm,
that is the highest level document of architecture inside of
mm,
our organization. And I say architecture because we do a lot of diagramming.
mm.
It's workflow diagrams, it's resource diagrams, it's, just relational diagrams for databases.
Yep.
We have to track all of that. And it is very common that no one in the company has ever put a list of every metric they want to track with where that data comes from in one place.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes
Um,
sense. And then I mean, even just being able to measure your progress. So if you don't know where the metrics are coming from, then yeah.
so that's a very big piece for us. Um,
Mm,
but to answer your question, we build scalable architecture with specific implementations. So what's on paper is probably not going to change even if we
mm,
switch to a different client.
mm,
It can be a different tool stack. Maybe we got to relabel some software, but fundamentally, the architecture is the same.
mm.
Every time I'm doing an ERP integration between an ERP and a CRM,
Yep.
I'm going to build a piece of middleware in between those two things.
Mm,
I know I don't have to do that, but I know that that is an architecture that is going to support a swap out on either side. And I know that's an architecture that everyone who's built for the past 20 years is going to be able to look at and
mm.
understand.
Yeah, I mean that's future proof in the project right there, right? I mean, if you know that those pieces are customizable in the future and will support whatever direction the business has to go, that's huge value just out of the gate.
The number of times we have clients, I've got a prospect right now where they're evaluating two final vendors for solutions. We are recommending more of like a roll your own CRM to integrate with their ERP.
Mm,
So we're going to use Airtable as middleware and database, and
yep.
then we're going to use NoLoco, which is one of those newer visualization
Mhm,
tools, and build the actual interface for their team on top of it.
mm,
That allows they know they're going to switch their ERP at some point in the next 5 years.
mm,
And we're like, great, when that happens, we're just going to plug in new data sources to Airtable. We're not changing any of your diagramming. None of your databases are going to change. And if you want to move off of Airtable, we can go Airtable to Postgres with ease.
Mhm.
So we know we can scale up as far as we need to.
Yeah.
And that no low front, it's still going to work with Postgres. So we're not going to have to change anything.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. It's like you take in a modular approach to all of these different piece parts so that you can get the connectivity you want, but you can also support them as the business evolves over time.
Exactly. I know our competitor in that quoting process is recommending Zoho,
Mhm.
and Zoho is great. But I told the client flat out, if you go with Zoho, you are locked into that ecosystem forever. It can do everything you want, it can do anything, but you can only hire Zoho experts from here on out if you want to get anything done.
Mhm.
And that's
Yeah.
okay, but that's ecosystem.
It's a decision, right? Yeah, that's
Yeah,
exactly right. I mean, I Zoho's a client, and I work with them quite a lot, and it is interesting because they have such a breadth of tools that it is great. It's amazing, but at the same time, if you aren't committed to each of those things, you're gonna create issues down the road. So that makes
yeah.
sense.
As a
Yeah.
shop, we don't work with Zoho, but we work with Salesforce and
Mhm.
HubSpot.
Mhm.
We don't work with Salesforce as often because they have more ecosystem lock in like that.
Yeah.
But we know how. And when we're doing a HubSpot integration to an ERP versus Salesforce integration to the same ERP, Salesforce is going to cost you 30% more to implement.
Mhm.
It's way more customizable,
Interesting. Mhm.
but it's going to cost you 20 to 30% more minimum.
Mhm. That depends on the needs of the business then, that makes sense, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when businesses are talking to you about this and you're working with them around, implementing AI, implementing the automation tools that can really make this valuable, what kind of challenges do they have, and how do they overcome those obstacles?
Yeah. So I think since we haven't talked about as AI quite as much as I'd like to,
Yeah,
let's
I'm always
center on
open for
maybe
that.
the biggest AI pitfall I see,
Sure.
which is everyone wants a customer facing chatbot.
Mm,
And especially in B2B, where most of our clients live, somebody's paying you 10, 20, $30,000 a year or 100 or a million a year.
mm,
They don't want a chatbot to interface with, but
mm.
they do want customer support that knows what they're talking about at all
Yeah,
times. And
that's fair.
there are hallucination issues and other like quality of response issues that I think make chatbots a seemingly great option to be customer facing, but
Mm,
in reality, there's that 0.1%, 1% error rate that you might not pick up in testing
mm,
that that is your massive risk.
mm,
And
mm.
so
Fair point.
we don't do customer facing chatbots for clients unless it is like a archive knowledge retrieval,
Mm,
something where it is very much not a human task.
mm,
Instead, we will build a team facing whisper agent chatbot with all the same
mm,
features, all the same functions, but then they have their offshore support agent. They can have a human understand the queries,
mm.
talk with them, reference on the chatbot, get whatever details, and act as that white glove filter.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think of it like sort of three scenarios around automation, and this fits in it really well. One, of course, is full automation, which certainly there are things in your business you want fully automated, but then there are other things that you really want to make sure either you have a human overseeing the operation or you have a human in the loop and doing that operation and supported by your virtual assistant. So I think that yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. There's really those three different scenarios that businesses need to deal with, and you have to figure out what's appropriate in each case. Yeah.
Yeah, we always say don't use a chainsaw if you can't swing an axe. And
Fair.
that goes back to don't use the automated, highly tuned 1,000 rep version if you're not used to cutting down a tree safely without it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. So any other obstacles that you think loom big for businesses and that they need to be aware of as they kind of go into this and how they think about it?
There's a pacing problem that a
Mm,
lot of businesses encounter. And I know I've heard about this from others in the space that brand themselves as automation agencies.
Mm,
Whereas we like to be specific. We are doing digital operations.
yeah.
Automation is a goal and a result,
Mm,
but first we need all these other things in place.
mm,
I think there's a myth of speed. Like, I'm still doing development. Even if we're doing no code
yeah.
and we're just clicking boxes, we are very much still doing traditional development. We need to take the time to do QA. We need to make sure that it is scoped and built properly from the start.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people who are going to ride by the seat of their pants. They're going to skip by steps, or
Mhm.
they're going to expect that we can deliver an automation every 2 weeks. But the reality is, you're like, the people at your business are not ready to take on that speed of change. 80% of my job is communicating with managers and team members,
Mm,
educating them on how this is going to improve their lives and getting buy-in on those things.
mm.
Because there's so much scare around AI is going to take our job or automation is going to take our job.
Well, and it is, I mean, there's a certain level of change management inside the organization you have to do just to get those employees to be open to using those tools and adopt and actually, make that a big part of their workflow. So that makes sense.
Yeah. Our favorite dirty words are digital transformation and change management. We don't
Mm.
talk about them, but I mean, they're most of the job, I think.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think, and the term digital transformation means so much, so many different things to so many different people that I actually don't use it much anymore either because I think it's, to me, it's more about building a digital first strategy than it is a digital transformation because I have digital things everywhere. That's not the problem. The problem is I need to actually approach all my processes with a digital mindset that helps get to the end result. So that makes a lot of sense to me.
I'd steal that digital first strategy. That's we do
You're
digital
welcome.
first operations is really what digital
Yeah.
operations is.
Well, it's an interesting conversation because I just spent a bunch of time building a report on decision intelligence, and a lot of decision intelligence is the automation level inside, right? What are the things that you can automate away so that you can put your team in focus on other things? So,
Yeah.
so I think as I thought about that a whole idea of digital first and in some task AI first really does mesh with what kind of outcome you're trying to get to. So.
Got a great couple of examples to highlight,
Yeah.
like and I realize this isn't true decision intelligence, but it is decision related processes
Mm,
um, that we've run across. So one of them is with a client that has about 70 locations throughout
mm,
the Western United States. They have security cameras on site, so they're doing live monitoring,
mm,
and they wanted to do monitoring for rules violations from employees.
mm,
And so right now they've got a team of 3 or 4 guys offshore to monitor all the spots. Now we can take a screenshot every 15 seconds, every 30 seconds of whatever the camera's showing,
mm,
pass it through a GPT-4. It's a 0-shot prompt, so no examples, nothing. Took us about a day to get working. It has an 85% true positive on identifying violations. And so a human can just look at the violation clips instead of looking at the feed all the time.
yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great example. That falls into my human oversight category, and that's exactly the kind of thing, right? So, if I, I always use the credit scoring one because I think that's a great hybrid
Yeah.
process, right? So it at its base, it can be automated because if you come in, you fill out your little form, and they do a quick check. It checks online your credit scores above X, you fit their criteria, it's approved. But if it falls outside of that line, then I don't want it to automatically be disapproved. I want it to go to a human who can then provide an additional perspective on that and decide if there's something that the automation is missing that could actually make sense for it to go forward. So I think
Yeah.
that's a great way to think about it. That's good. Yeah.
And the credit version you're describing, we use nearly an identical decision tree for
Yeah.
account-based marketing for
Yep.
lead qualification, where we can scrape all of their profiles. We can pull all the data together and aggregate a much higher quality picture of the company in order to inform a decision if it's not quite a perfect fit.
Mm. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, so we mentioned metrics a little bit earlier, but didn't really talk about them much. So I'd love to kind of help the audience with this piece of it because I people struggle with this a lot. I think finding the right metrics and what do you think they should be looking at from a success metric for AI and automation kind of implementations? I mean, how do they make sure that what they're changing is going to lead to some real benefit to the business?
Yeah. So we've got sort of two big categories of metrics we look at. The first one is super simple, and it goes for any what we categorize as process automations, which is any repeatable time saving automation.
Mm,
Those we've got really simple numbers, and we know what the numbers should work out to be. It's how much time are we saving when we automate this thing?
right.
And we are looking for 2 to 300% in the first year.
Mm,
That's really the ROI calculation we're looking to achieve. There's a lot of back of the napkin rules we use to identify what can and cannot be automated. But
mm,
end of the day, we want right in between that 2 and 300% return.
mm. Yeah. I mean, that, obviously, from a business perspective, that's an amazing return and something that would certainly get their attention when you when you share that. I'm sure. So,
Oh yeah. But
any
it takes a
other?
certain volume to be able to return that
Uh,
well. A
yeah.
lot of businesses, and this is the second case, it's does this support our strategic goals?
Mm,
So we have a client where we recently put automation and AI throughout their quote to close process inside. So customer table CRM
mm,
and the end of their quoting process when they close is client signing off on a purchase order and order documentation so they can then go manufacture the final product.
mm,
They had lost about 20,000 a month before they engaged us because the client did not sign that final PO because they
mm,
weren't using any sort of document, contract signing. Long story short, they had a clear goal, and that was we want to overhaul this process so it was managed and viewable 100% inside of our CRM.
mm,
And so it is set up in such a way that we can build a remote outbound sales team.
mm.
That was not a metric, but that was a strategic goal for the business.
Right.
And we knew the only way they could achieve that goal was with automation to force the process throughout the organization.
Mm. Mhm. Yeah, I like the approach, and we talked about this a little bit before, but I do like this sort of mental picture of thinking about this as more focused around operations than it is just about. Now, I mean, decision intelligence is its whole thing, and I do think it's a really important solution these days for companies to look at. But in
Yeah.
general, the idea that I'm trying to automate my business, what are those things that I need to do? What do I need human in the loop? What do I need all these other is really focused around operations, and that to me makes a lot easier for the conversation, with the customer. So,
Yeah, that's sort of how we frame ourselves.
mm,
That's we are an operations first organization.
mm,
Everyone I hire comes from operations backgrounds. So it's not like I'm hiring like product managers to transfer over to this stuff. It's, oh, you've been an operations consultant documenting workflows for 6 years.
mm,
How about you come document workflows and then also write the scope for the automation that goes with it?
mm.
Um,
Interesting.
I think that actually circling back, that is probably the biggest thing that I think, maybe not the biggest, but second or third biggest thing companies screw up inside of their like implementation of these technologies.
Mm,
And this is a talent question as much as anything.
yeah.
It costs you, if you want to have like people who understand the balance between technology and business operations process and goals, it's going to cost you more to hire those people. And I know at least when we've helped clients build those teams internally, they're looking at 100 to 150,000 for somebody based in the US
Right.
that And that's not like a C-level. That's not like somebody like me who can lead the implementation. That's like a project level implementer. That's somebody
Mhm.
sitting with team members and documenting workflows.
Yep. Yeah, that makes sense. So let's take a little different filter for a minute and
Yeah.
think about how, because it obviously AI we know changes so rapidly now, and
Every 6 to 12 months.
yeah, I don't know. Sometimes I think it changes weekly, but that's a different
Oh,
problem, I
well, that,
guess.
I mean, that perfect example, GPT 4.0 mini
Yeah.
recently announced with fine tuning
Yep.
at under $5 per million tokens.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah.
The number of use cases where we've earmarked to clients, okay, we can build this open source to fine tune,
Yeah.
or you guys can wait until a cheap one becomes available on OpenAI. I mean, we've got at least
Yeah.
half a dozen projects that are getting greenlit.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, and that small. I'm a big fan of small models, small and mid-sized models. I think that's a wave that you're going to see grow and grow from a business perspective because there's so many applications of that that just make more sense than having the massive large model. So what do you think from an evolution then as we start to think about how AI is helping with business operations, say over the next, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, 5 years? What trends do you think companies should be aware of as they think about this?
Yeah. I think number one, at least on the automation front, right now, AI is really only useful for some of these like data summarization, transformation tasks, and for these basic fuzzy logic cases
Mm,
where, oh, an AI can tell if anybody's wearing a hat backwards in a photo, but is it going to be able to tell all the time? Not yet.
mm,
Um, so it can help but not replace yet. Or it can figure out, is this email an order or a complaint? Can figure that out from the text of the email and route
right.
accordingly. So every generation of AI can take on sort of another magnitude of
Mm,
tasks. And that allows us to increase automation over time inside of processes
yeah.
until you get to human oversight only. Um,
Yeah.
on the other side, any active facing role or action focused role, I guess might be the way to. So I think about this for designers as much as our internal like workflow strategists, as much as a developer or a customer support agent.
Mm,
I think every one of these people is going to have a small model chatbot that is
yep.
referencing their company's SOPs and their company's internal knowledge base.
Mhm.
And that's we build those off the shelf with the existing tools for clients very frequently. I just see that getting more and more specialized where we have clients now, they might have 3 or 4 of them for different departments or levels of management. And I expect every role will have something like that in the
Yeah.
future.
Yeah, I mean, it does make sense to me, and I keep a small model running on my desktop that I use for different things for exactly that reason, right? It just trained on all my data. I'm not there's no risk of it going anywhere else, and it's an open source model, so I can take advantage when it's improved.
Yeah,
I think that's a really good point. I feel like that's something that I hear more and more these days. Companies talking about, okay, how do I use, what's the right tool for the job? I think is a question that we didn't see answered a lot in the 2 years ago, but now as we've evolved more, companies are starting to be more aware of that.
shout out my favorite model.
Absolutely.
Big fan of Anthropic, huge fan, got early access to the API. It's the
Mhm.
model we deploy most. The entire company is switching to Claude Teams
Mhm.
because I love that project's feature.
Yeah.
Fun fact, it does workflow diagrams in Mermaid,
Hmm.
which is super
Nice.
useful for my
Yeah.
job.
Yeah, that would be useful. I use all the models just because I get asked questions about them all the time, so I feel like I need to be able to talk about them.
I
But
have subscriptions to all of them.
yeah,
The
yeah, same. But
team,
yeah, that's good. Well, my local little model is a Mistral 7B
nice.
model, which is a nice model for what I need. Right, it's appropriate for what I need.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Anyway,
I,
so I
so
let me go one more place because I think we were talking about advice and kind of what people are doing. So I just wanted to make sure that I got this in. What would, if you're talking to an entrepreneur who's thinking about, using AI in their business or automation in their business, I mean, what should they be thinking about, and what are the first steps they should take? How do they approach this?
I think the first step to take is to just start talking with a GPT-4 or Claude or a Gemini.
Mm,
And I specify one of those three because right now, those closed models are the best, easily available, most up
mm,
to date. Pick one or
mm,
pick all three, play with them, start using them just for basic brainstorming
mhm.
and bouncing ideas off of because it's the smartest intern you've ever had.
Yeah, yeah.
Level two would be start using like a Perplexity or something like that for an AI powered search.
Mhm.
I know, I think Search GPT is coming out now too.
Search GPT is coming. There's also Upend, which is a nice little model that our search engine that this college student in Toronto built. That's out there. That's kind of cool because it connects to 100 different models. But Perplexity, you're right. That's a great search tool.
Yeah. And I like Perplexity because you can actually trigger automations from Make
Yep.
with it, which allows you to create like, oh, I want a daily summary of news or a weekly summary of news, can fully automate that going
Yep.
straight into Slack.
Yeah.
Um,
Nice.
so I think that's sort of a level two. And then level three is, and this is a Gemini exclusive right now,
Mhm.
you're gonna do a video walkthrough, record it of any process on your computer,
Mm.
and then you're gonna upload it to YouTube. So that way you can share the video, or I think Google Drive now you can use,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
you can then share the video direct to Gemini. And then you can have Gemini break down step by step instructions from
Mm.
the video and audio instead
Nice.
of just the transcript.
Nice. Yeah, that I haven't tried yet, but I am going to test that. That's really interesting. So.
Well, then you can say, hey, this is how I do it. You can feed it API docs
Mm.
and you can say, generate the workflow diagram in Mermaid for this thing or generate
Mm.
this other. And
Nice.
really, like, I think that's sort of the biggest thing people miss with these tools who are actively building with them now
Mm.
is they aren't pushing them to the edges because like you've probably noticed I'm super process oriented. I'm all about flowcharts and I don't really think about the AI component quite as much. That's because if we do great flowcharts,
Mm.
AI just fits into a flowchart.
Right. Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, hey, so we're running out of time, but before I let you go, one thing I always like to get at the end of the episode, can you recommend somebody, thought leader, an author, somebody that you think would be important for the audience to know to help them, as they move forward on this journey?
Oh yeah. So my personal mentor, the guy I went to work for in St. Louis, Jesse Pujji. He has a newsletter called Bootstrap Giants. He's on Twitter. He's on LinkedIn.
Hmm,
Um, Gateway X is the name of his venture studio.
hmm,
I don't know if he's worth 100 million yet, but I know he's going to be worth a billion someday.
hmm,
Extraordinarily successful, amazing entrepreneur,
hmm,
terrible with technology, still gets the job done, and only operates in tech or like tech adjacent businesses.
hmm.
So
Makes sense.
I think a really good person to watch because I think he's manages people in a way that brings great talent to him. And that is a massive advantage in this AI age.
Yeah, that's great. That's yeah, very good recommendation. Thank you, and Michael, thank you so much for joining today. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you for having me on, Michael. It's been wonderful.
And that's the show for this week. Thank you all for joining. Remember to hit that subscribe button. If you enjoyed the show, please leave us a 5-star rating on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform to help others find the show. For more on AI and other software research reports, briefs, and blog posts, check out arionresearch.com. If you have AI, generative AI, or business automation expertise, either as a provider or as an end user, email your information to disambiguation@arionresearch.com, and we'll see if we can get you on as a guest. Don't forget to join us next week. Disambiguation is an Arion Research production. I'm Michael Fawcett, and this is the Disambiguation Podcast.